corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture.
Okay.
They're the same picture.
So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but every Sliver deck is exactly the same. You just choose a random Sliver commander and autofill your deck with every single Sliver in Magic. But what if I told you guys that I made a Sliver Overlord deck that doesn't have a single other Sliver in it? Well, I didn't.
So that was a...
But it doesn't have any other cards with the word Sliver on it. So that kinda counts, right? Welcome to Tribal. This deck is oozing with more flavor than your grandma's pulled pork, and you actually can win some games with it. Just filling our deck with a bunch of tribal cards wasn't enough of a restriction, so I only included 4 types of cards in the deck. We have lands, changelings, specific tribal cards, and cards that can change your creature's types. Now what do I mean by specific tribal cards? Specific tribal cards are cards that only work for a specific tribe, like Risen Reef. It only works for elementals. We don't include any of those normie tribal cards like Kindred Discovery that just let you choose any tribe. That would be too easy. Let's start with the mana base. You have a bunch of lands that you would expect to see in a 5-color deck, but there's also a couple of interesting ones hidden in there. Because our deck has a bunch of changelings in it, we can put in a bunch of lands that only come in untapped if we're holding a creature of a specific type. You probably don't see these lands very often in Commander, but in our deck, they're pretty much just budget dual lands. We're also running 2 tribal lands that you've probably never seen before. The first is Tomb of Urami, and it's really bad. The only reason we're running it is because it's the only Ogre tribal card I found. But we do actually want a low swamp count for our deck, for a reason you'll find out later. We also have 1 colorless land, which is Griffin Canyon. You could replace this with Swarm Yard or Elephant Graveyard if you have one of those, but something about Griffin Canyon just made me laugh, so I put in this one. It may seem like a meme, and honestly it mostly is, but you can't catch people off guard by untapping a creature to block with. No one ever expects to get caught out by Griffin Canyon. Now let's take a look at some of the changelings. I count Kataryan Summons as a changeling because for 1 mana it can tutor for any changeling in your deck. Amoeboid Changeling has a lot of good utility because you can change your opponent's creatures into slivers and then take them with your commander. Shapeshare is really good because it can turn itself or any of our shapeshifters into any creature on the board.
I can be whatever you want. You just tell me what you want and I'll be that for you.
You're dumb.
I could be that.
Mirror Entity is a huge all-star because it can change our entire board into changelings whenever we want. And a regular cohort is also pretty nice because it lets us double dip on our ETB effects. We also have the 3 champion changelings. These can be good to protect our creatures from a board wipe or to just get more ETB effects. And if you ever get all 3, you can have them just champion each other forever to get infinite ETBs and maybe win. And lastly, we have Morophon. 95% of the time we're going to name Sliver with him to play our commander for free, but we can technically name any creature type we want if there's another one that's more useful. Alright, now for the most important part of the deck, which everybody knows is...
I mean, it is card draw and ramp. Card draw and ramp. I always talk about every deck needs card draw and ramp.
It might sound tough trying to find enough card draw and ramp if we're only running tribal cards, but there are actually a surprising number of good options out there. Cards like Harabaz Druid can tap for at least 8 mana in the right circumstances, and Yuriko is just the best card draw engine in the deck. Now some of you might look at a card like Thunderherd Migration and think, wait, isn't this just a rampant growth that sometimes costs 3? Anyways, now onto our Reanimation Package. That's right, even Tribal gets to run Reanimation cards. Soul Exchange is a card that no one's ever played before, and it's our cheapest direct reanimation spell. Grim Captain's Call lets us return a pirate, vampire, dinosaur, and merfolk to our hand from our graveyard, and in our deck there's a decent chance we can actually get all 4. This card is actually what inspired me to build the deck in the first place. If we can get Hakan onto the board, then we can just play as many knights from our graveyard for free whenever we want. This can actually go infinite pretty quick if we have a cheap changeling in the graveyard. But my personal favorite is Return of the Night Stalkers. The 7 mana sorcery reanimates all of your Night Stalkers and puts them directly on the battlefield. I checked on Gatherer, and as of this recording, there are only 12 Night Stalkers printed in all of Magic, and they're all really terrible. So I can pretty much guarantee that no one in your playgroup has seen this card before. The only downside is you have to sacrifice all of your swamps, but luckily our deck only has like 2 swamps in it, so this usually isn't a problem. Now we get to the responsible section of the deck. We got board wipes, graveyard hate, and removal. Let's start with the board wipes. We only have 2 tribal board wipes in the deck. The first is Widespread Brutality. Now I checked the rules, and even though there aren't any creatures in Magic that have the army type on them, army is still technically a creature type, so I'm counting this as an army tribal card. I know it's a stretch, but it's really hard to find a board wipe, so I'm counting it. The other option is Whelming Wave. This one's surprisingly good, and you can definitely knock out a player by bouncing their board and then attacking with all your changelings. As far as Graveyard Hate goes, I could only find one tribal option worth running. It is really slow at 6 mana, but it does give all your zombies lifelink, which can be a pretty nice bonus. As far as direct removal, we have a bunch of cards like Reaper King that let us destroy a permanent whenever we play a changeling. We also get to run New Blood, which is like a 4 mana black mind control if you have a vampire to tap. And of course we had to run a Eula, it was just too funny not to. I've definitely gotten her up to like 40 power and killed someone in one shot before. Alright, now onto our creature type changing cards. Artificial Evolution is definitely the strangest. You just get to change any creature word on any card and just make it into a different creature word. And the weirdest part is that the effect doesn't even go away at the end of the turn, so you kinda just have to remember what creature type you named. Arcane Adaptation can be super useful too. If nothing else, you can name Sliver, and then your commander can tutor for any creature in your deck. But I've definitely named Scarecrow, Knight, and even Saproling before, depending on the situation. Unnatural Selection also has a bunch of utility. If your commander's out, you can make your opponent's creatures into slivers and then take them for good. Next up, we have Shields of Velasvel, and 2 other cards that are really only good if you have the shields in your hand. Luckily, the Shields is a tribal instant with Changeling, so it counts as a sliver in your deck, and you can tutor for it with your commander, so you'll have it pretty much every game. A lot of the time, you'll be targeting yourself with it to make all of your creatures into shapeshifters. But you can also target your opponents, and this can be super useful sometimes. You can use Spirit Mirror to destroy all of one player's creatures because they'll all turn into reflections. If you have a Varchild on the board and a way to sacrifice it, then you can actually just steal all of someone's creatures because they'll count as survivors. I might be stretching the definition of tribal card a tiny bit here, but it is technically possible to build a reflection tribal or a survivor tribal deck, so I'm gonna go ahead and say these count. Next up, we have a bunch of cards that help us with combat. Najeela is absolutely busted, and if you have enough warriors, you basically just win the game as soon as you attack. Corvath and Sylvia together give all of your changelings flying, double strike, and haste, which is absolutely ridiculous. And they partner with each other, so if you have one, you can just tutor for the other one when you play it. I'm pretty sure Great Bow Doyen is the only archer tribal card that exists, and it's really good in this deck. It makes it so that whenever any of your changelings deal damage to your opponent's creatures, they also deal damage to their face, and it can take people out really quick. Hungry Lynx might seem a little weird, but it actually has a lot more utility than you might think. If your opponent blocks one of your changelings, you might be able to change their creature into a rat, and since yours is a cat, yours won't take any damage. Also, if any creature is about to die, you can change it into a rat, and then all of your cats will get a +1/+1 counter. And lastly, we have good old Spider Fog. This is probably the only deck where you might want to play Arachnogenesis when you're the attacker. You won't get any tokens, but it won't stop any of the damage that your spiders do, which hopefully will be most of your team, so it can end up being a one-sided fog in the right situation. Next up, we have our 4 cheat cards. Didgeridoo lets us flash in any changeling for 3 mana, and Deathbellow Warcry lets us tutor for 4 changelings and just put them straight onto the battlefield. This can actually win us the game a lot of the time, because we can get our 3 champion changelings and make them champion each other forever. Mogcatcher and Skyshroud Poacher both just let us cheat out a changeling every turn from our deck for just 3 mana. This is probably the easiest way to cheat out Morophon on turn 5, and then just play our commander for free. We have one last card to talk about, and honestly is probably one of the best in the deck, and that's Atla Palani. If we have a way to change our own creatures into eggs, then we can just start killing our own creatures to get new ones for free. Once you have her out, it's honestly pretty easy to win the game accidentally. Now if you've made it this far, you might have noticed that there are some cards I didn't talk about that should maybe be in the deck. We had some tribal cards from Jumpstart, we also had Winota to cheat out a bunch of humans. Rin and Sari would be insane in the deck because every changeling we play counts as a cat and a dog. And I also left out all the cards with the party mechanic. But there's actually a good reason why I left out all these cards, and that's because I wanted to show you guys that this is actually one of the easiest decks to update over time. Wizards will always print new tribal cards, so every time a new set comes out, you can probably find 1 or 2 good cards to add to the deck. Yep, that's definitely why I left them out, and not because I haven't updated my deck in over a year or anything like that.
My disappointment is immeasurable. and my day is ruined.
If you liked the video, hit subscribe so you'll get notified for the next one. I'll have another one up soon about 3 of the jankiest decks I could find in Commander Legends.